Hey everybody, welcome to the Palm Beach Church online midweek. Great to have you here with me today and here all together. If you're here watching, especially if you're watching us live today, go ahead and check on in. Let us know you're there. Remember to subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already on YouTube or Facebook, and share the classes. The class we've been looking at for the last few weeks is entitled Supreme, and I've been talking about the supremacy of Jesus and the different ways in which God shows the supremacy of Jesus. And here's what we've looked at so far. God demonstrates the supremacy of Jesus through his birth. In other words, his birth is like no other birth. Through his gospel, his kingdom, his power, and today we'll be looking at his love. And I'm not going to review all those because we'll get into all those classes, but in all these ways and so much more, like I said from the beginning, I thought about seven ways that came to my mind as I look at the Gospels and I look at the story of Jesus, about 7 ways in which God just shows that Jesus is greater. He's greater. The way he was born and his kingdom and his power, his love, it's greater. It is supreme. And you could add other things to that list. And I'm sure if when we talk about Jesus and the ways in which God shows his supremacy, there's other things that come to mind. These are just the things that I've been talking about the last few weeks. And tonight, again, I want us to consider just how supreme the love of Jesus is. Now, love is one of those things that we could talk about as we discuss the character of Jesus, which might be a series down the road here, and it's certainly something we could talk about when we talk about the character of Jesus. I included it here because when I think about the love of Jesus, when I think about the love of God, it is like no other love. It is the standard of love, right? 1 John 4:8 says God is love, right? He is the standard. And Jesus is the reflection of God. And so as Jesus comes into this world, he's showing us this is the love of God. And I think it's important that we always go back to God and see Jesus and as we know God, remind ourselves like this is what love is. And not allow for the world to define what God is, not allow our own thoughts, not allow what we read in books or even what we have experienced in life. Like the standard of love is God. And Jesus is the perfect representation of God. And so God shows the supremacy of Jesus through his love. In the way that Jesus loved, the love that he had, that he had and that he has is supreme. Let's start off in our Bibles here. You can turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9, verse 35. It says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. And again, it's a familiar passage, and right in the middle of this passage, and I want us to remember this and to understand this, is it says he had compassion. Compassion is something that you feel. Right? He had compassion. And that feeling of compassion led to what he did. The feeling of love led to the act of love. Love, I believe, is at the core of everything that God does. Love is the motivation of God. Love is the motivation of Jesus. And if for us, we could try to do the things that Jesus does, or we could try to care for people the way that Jesus cared for them. However, I believe that for us to do that, for us to live as Jesus lived, it needs to start with us loving as Jesus loved. It starts with us feeling what Jesus felt. You know, the love of Jesus is something that is seen, which is what, makes his love, I believe, greater, right? Makes it supreme. It is something that is seen, and it is seen continuously, and it is seen with everyone. And we'll get more on that in just a few minutes. It's seen. But I want us to remember that what we see is what he already feels. Now, let's consider these passages. Okay, I'll put these up on the screen here. Matthew 14. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. See, he felt, then he healed. Matthew 15. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and when he had given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and they in turn gave it to the people. Again, he felt, then he did. He felt, and then he fed. In Matthew 20, Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. Again, he felt, and then he did. Going back to the original passage here we're reading from in Matthew chapter 9, it's that same thing. He had compassion on them, and then he healed their sick. And I think when you consider that passage in Matthew chapter 9, it says he had this compassion on them, and then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. But I want us to try to understand and the context of what Jesus, of the situation. Right? He sees the people, and it's very clear that what he was about, what he did and what he said came from a place of love. He had this compassion. He sees these people and he's like, man, they're like this lost sheep, right? They're harassed, they're helpless because they need a shepherd. And then he says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Like, the harvest is plentiful. There's plenty of people that need to be loved, that need to be shepherded. There's plenty of people that need to be healed. But there's few that will love them, that will heal them, that will shepherd them, that will feed them. The harvest, the people that need it are plenty, he says, but the ones that are willing to love as I love them, those are few. He says, so pray to the Lord of the harvest that he sends them out. That he sent, he's not praying for there to be more people in need. Jesus is like, there's plenty of people that need to be loved. What we don't have a lot of are people to love. People that will feel what I feel. Because you see, I believe that for us to have the habits of Jesus, we need to start with trying to imitate the heart of Jesus. And I know for me, I try to just jump to the habit. I try to just jump to, let me treat people as Jesus treated them. Let me do the godly thing. Let me do the Jesus-like thing. 1 John is very clear. If for us to, if you know Jesus, you should walk as Jesus did. And I think for me, speaking for me at least, I take that and say, okay, I need to imitate Christ. However, in 1 John, he goes on to that and he talks about the love of God and how God loved us first. And he goes on to say, in the same way that he has loved us, we are to love others. In the same way that he gave his life, we are to give our life. You see, to walk as Jesus did starts with me being as Jesus was. For me to live as Jesus lived must start with me loving like Jesus loved. And his love is supreme. Man, what he felt. And here's the thing. This is why being a disciple of Jesus is not about, it's not about perfection. It is about pursuit. We're constantly pursuing Christ. Constantly. I might never get there. It's not about perfection. It is about pursuit. And man, I want to be, that's what I want to pursue, is if I want to feel how Jesus felt. I want to be able to look at people, even in their worst, and feel that compassion, see their helplessness, see their need for the kind of shepherding and the kind of healing and the kind of feeding that only God can provide. I don't want to just do the right thing. I want to feel what Jesus felt. I want to feel that compassion. His love is supreme. His love is supreme because it comes from a place of genuine love. His love is supreme because at the core of everything that God does, at the core of everything Jesus did, there's love. And as he felt it, then we see it. Now look in John chapter 11. If you could turn your Bibles there. Because this is one of those stories that I think demonstrates the love of Jesus. There's a couple of passages that I want to focus on here that we'll look at. And I think really shows the love of Jesus. Both how he felt it, how he lived it, how he demonstrated it. Okay, so John 11, we'll start in verse 3. I'm going to read from verse 3 to 7. So turn your Bibles there. John 11, verse 3 says, "So the sister sent word to Jesus, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.' When he heard this, Jesus said, 'This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, that God's Son may be glorified through it.' Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, 'Let us go back to Judea.'" Now, did you catch that? To me, that's such an interesting phrase or an interesting couple sentences. Jesus, he loved Martha, loved the sister, loved Lazarus. So when he heard he was sick, he stayed. Like, not he loved them, but he stayed. No, he loved them, so he stayed. See, and he stayed, and we know the story. And if you don't, you can just read it and you can see the ending of it. But they didn't know, you know, they didn't know the story. They didn't know how this is gonna end. Only Jesus knows how this is gonna end. And to me, it's a great reminder that there's so many times God does things we don't understand, right? We don't get, because we don't have the eternal vision that God has. We don't have that eternal vision. We don't think eternally, because we're not, you know, we're human beings, not an eternal being. So we don't have that mindset. And so many times that God does, and so whenever I even think of myself, or whenever we start a phrase saying something like, "Man, if God is love, then why the minute we start with, if God is love, we're starting off wrong. Every sentence when we talk about God's love should be, God is love. Knowing that God loves, I'm at a loss of why he's doing. Like, we could certainly not understand why he's doing it, but I think it needs to start with a conviction that everything he does is out of love. And he loved Lazarus, he loves his sisters, and yet when he was sick, he didn't rush. See, he didn't rush because he knew what's going to happen after he dies is going to be something great. And God is going to be glorified through Lazarus. And the Son of God is going to be glorified through Lazarus and through what God is able to do through Lazarus. You see, and that's real love. That is real love. Like, he knew there's something greater happening here. There's something greater happening here, and I'm using Lazarus to do it because I love him. I think if we can be convinced and we could always remember that what God does is out of this love he has for us. See, he loves us just the way he loves us just the way we are. So much so that he doesn't want us to stay just the way we are. Right? He loves us just the way we are. So much so that he doesn't want us to stay the way we are. He wants us to be all that he created us to be. He wants us to reach our full potential. And isn't that what love is? Like when you have genuine love for somebody, don't you want to see them grow? Don't you want to see them accomplish all that you know they can? When we don't love somebody that way, then we don't care as much. I mean, I don't know if that's a cool way of saying it, but we just don't care as much. You know, I settle. Okay, and I'll speak for myself. I know I'll settle for a lot less in people that I don't love the same way as I do my children, my wife, those that are close to me. That's why God's love is supreme. See, he loves everyone with that same intense love where he's like, oh, no. You could be more. I created you to be more. I created you to have a greater impact. Now, to get there, there might be some testing along the way. To get there, you're going to need to struggle. To get there, I'm going to need to take you down this path. But everything that he does, if we can be convinced of this, that all that he does, he does it because he loves. Jesus loved them, so he stayed. What an awesome phrase. Jesus loved them, so he stayed and let them die. Because he knew what was coming was something even greater. And so he stays. Let's continue with the story here in verse 33. So when he sees it now, again, Jesus knows what he's about to do, but he realizes that they don't know, much like we don't understand. And that's why, man, what's so awesome about the love of God and his grace, like he knows, he does things that confuse us. And because of his love, he doesn't get frustrated with us. He knows, he's like, I know you don't understand yet, but stay faithful. Stay faithful and it will become clear. Now, knowing what he was going to do, Jesus sees in verse 33, he sees the sisters. He looks at the scene. People are crying. Lazarus has now been dead for a couple days. And when Jesus saw her weeping, verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He said. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved them? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Like, they understood, like, man, this guy could have done. And see, this is where the confusing part is. We don't always understand the actions of God, but we can believe is that whatever those actions are, at the core of it is love. And his love is not only seen by his in the outside, it is a love that is felt. Like God is an emotional being. He doesn't just do loving things. He feels love. He feels it. He feels love. When in Genesis, what is it? Genesis chapter 5, when he sees Genesis 5, Genesis 6, when he sees the sin, it troubles him. Like he feels something. When he sees the people crying, because again they don't grasp what is happening. It says he's moved. He feels it. And now he feels it, and here's the difference and why God is perfect. Because God, I, I believe, and I believe the scriptures show us this, God is emotional. He feels emotions deeply. At the same time, God has self-control. So he doesn't make decisions based solely on what he feels. He does what he knows is right. Right? So Jesus, he feels that, and I'm sure from the moment that Lazarus was sick, that he knew he was going to die, Jesus probably already feeling like, man, this is going to be rough for them. Like he could feel that. At the same time, he knows it's going to be rough for them, but this is what's going to be best for them. Right? It's much like with his own life. When Jesus in Gethsemane, he's feeling the pain. He's confessing to God. He's praying to God. He's praying to the Father. And he's saying, I'm troubled. I am troubled. I feel this sorrow to the point of death. At the same time, even though he feels that, he says, but let your will be done. See, he always does what's right, but don't mistake that for him not feeling what we feel. And not having, before he raises Lazarus from the dead, it says he felt the pain of those around him. Even though he knew what was about to happen, he felt the pain. And it says Jesus wept. It wasn't just like Jesus wept to make a scene and to make a statement. Jesus wept because he loved. And he felt. And he was moved. And then let's continue in verse 38. It says, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. And he tells them, no, okay, take away the stone. I mean, again, as he raises Lazarus from the dead, right, he goes to the place. He says, take away the stone. And again, if you don't know how story ends, you could go ahead and read it there towards the end. And he's like, look, I'm doing this so that you will believe. Right, in verse 41, verse 40, verse 42. Or I'm sorry, verse 40, he tells the sisters, he says, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? He's like, I'm going to do this so that you'll believe. And after this, this is going to take your faith to a whole other level. But the way there was painful. See, and Jesus, he gets them there because he loves them. He shows this. He sacrificed himself to then be resurrected again out of love. His love is at the core of everything he does. We can trust in the love of Jesus. It is a love that you want to be in the presence of. It is a love worthy of imitation. In fact, it is a love that we're called to imitate. It says in 1 John 3:16, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. His love is one that we are called to imitate. His love is something that is at the core of everything he did. His love is seen. And the last thing I want to mention here about his love was unconditional. His love is so supreme. To me, is one of the reasons is because his love is just so unconditional. In John 13, and we're not going to read all of this here, but in John 13, he says in verse 1, it was before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Again, that is the love of Jesus. He says he loved them to the end with all the struggles and all they did. And even at the end, when they all abandoned him at some point, he says he loved them to the end. Now in verse 21, where he's sitting on the table and he already knows that that Judas is going to betray him. And so he says in verse 21, if you could look at verse 21 there, says after he first he washes their feet. He does what a servant would do. Again, he doesn't just do the loving thing. He felt a love that led him to do the loving thing. Right? He loved these guys. He's like, man, I'm gonna serve them. He washes their feet. Again, doesn't just do the loving thing. He feels that love. So in verse 21, afterwards, he says, after he has said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. And now again, when it says he was troubled in spirit, I don't think it's like he's worried about himself. Again, it's this love he had even for Judas. It troubled him. He's like, man, he's headed down that wide road. He's headed down the wrong path. And it just troubled him. And he says, one of you is going to betray me. And I know I've said this many times. It's one of the things that really shows me how much Jesus loved these guys, that in verse 22, his disciples stared at one another at a loss to know which one of them he meant. It was like he treated all of them in such a way where when he said one of you is going to betray me, they didn't even know who it was, because he loved all of them unconditionally. One of them in verse 23, the disciple whom Jesus loved was reclining next to him. And in the book of the Gospel of John, John refers to himself as the disciple that Jesus loved. And it's not said like in an arrogant way, like he loved me. He doesn't say the one he loved most. He just says, John identified, he identified himself, the way he wanted to be known. It wasn't for his love. He wanted to be known for the love that he felt from God. He says, man, you want to know something about me? I'm loved by Jesus. That's what you can know about me. Not what I did, how I loved, or known as the apostle of love. No, he refers to himself as the one that Jesus loved. I mean, and I pray that we have that kind of intimacy with God. I pray we have that kind of relationship with God, where as disciples of Jesus, we walk in this world as someone who's loved by him. Let me finish the story here. So Simon Peter mentions to the disciple and said, verse 24, ask him which one he means. Like, hey, who's going to betray him? Jesus answered, it is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish. Then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. So Jesus told him, what you're about to do quickly. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him, since Judas had charge of the money, and some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the festival or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. Let me just say something here with that in that scene. He gives him the bread, and there's someone like Jesus reaching out to Judas, sharing with him and giving him that bread, and extending still that love. And yet Judas at that moment decided, he rejected that love. He didn't understand. And again, a lot of it came because he didn't understand what Jesus was doing. And brothers and sisters, this is why it's so important to understand God is love. Because when we don't start with that premise, then the things that God does, when they become confusing, we can become unfaithful. But if we can start with a premise that whatever God does, at the core of it is love, then even when times are confusing, we can go back to that and say, well, man, I don't understand what God's doing. I don't see it. I don't get it. I'm struggling with it. But I can be sure of this, that whatever he's doing is done out of love. See, Judas did not understand the ministry of Jesus. He didn't understand his kingdom. He didn't understand what Jesus was doing. And so when Jesus, even to the very end, extends his love, Judas does not accept that love and goes out and betrays him. You know, the kind of love that Jesus demonstrates, the teaching about love, it's confusing, even to the world. It's confusing. Right? Jesus said, love, don't hate your, Matthew 5, he's telling even to those that are there listening to him, he says, I know you've heard, to love your neighbor and hate your enemy. He says, I come to tell you, love your enemies, pray for your enemies. See, supreme love of Jesus, it is something that is at the core of everything he does. That love is something that we could see. He continually and constantly showed that love that he felt. He showed it. And that love is unconditional. And it is with that in mind that he then tells the disciples in John 13:34 and 35, which I believe, well, we don't have it here on the screen, but you can read it down here in John 13:34 and 35. Where I believe a lot of us know it. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Again, I don't think he's just referring to this at the end of his life. I think he's just referring to, the way I served. It's like, man, you gotta love like I've loved. A love that comes from within. A love that is felt. And because it's felt, it is seen. And it is unconditional. Brothers and sisters, I pray that we could love one another. That we could love our neighbor this way. And when our neighbors see his kingdom, what will stick out is the love that they see that we have for one another. I pray that even though I know for me, I might never reach that point to express and feel love as deeply as Jesus did. But I pray that I'll always strive. I pray that you will always strive. Let's not settle, but let's strive continually to imitate the supreme love of Jesus. I'll leave us with these discussion questions. What impacts you about the love of Jesus? What is it that impacts you? And what is your favorite story that shows Jesus expressing his love? As you think about all the different ways that Jesus expressed it, the different ways that he showed his love, what's the one that comes to your mind? And my prayer is this: for Christ's love compels us. I pray that his love will compel us, because we are convinced that he died for all, and therefore all have died. My prayer is that it is that love that he feels, that he shows, and that he has unconditionally. I pray that love compels us to be faithful, to love God, to love others, to love one another. Glad you could be with us here tonight. We'll continue this series next Wednesday night. Until then, good night. God bless.